Hello and welcome. I'm Maggie Probert and I'm the Development Director at the National Center. First, a little housekeeping. Please mute your phone so we are not disturbed by background noises. Use the chat function to ask questions. We will leave plenty of time to respond to your questions. If you have not already downloaded the Guide to Funding, you may want to do that now. From the home page of our website, parentsasteachers.org, click on the Resources tab and scroll down to the link to the guide. Today we are going to talk about private fundraising. Another webinar will deal with public fundraising. Let's begin with a definition of nonprofit. You are a nonprofit if you hold a 501c3 designation from the IRS. This means that individual contributions and contributors may take a tax deduction for their gifts and contributions to you. Most institutional donors, foundations, corporations, and agencies will need to verify your nonprofit status to make sure that you are eligible for funding. Gifts to school districts are also tax deductible in most cases. Many school districts also have 501c3 designations. You will need to check with your superintendent to verify the status of your district. No matter what type of organization is sponsoring your Parents as Teachers program, you will also need to ask for permission to do fundraising, verify your 501c3 status, and ask for the federal tax ID number. Be sure to clear all fundraising activities with your parent organization or agency. Let's start with this video. A few of the statistics are a little outdated, but it is by and large correct. If your connection is slow or buffering, don't worry. You can access the webinar tomorrow from our website and watch the video then. In 2011, the most recent data available, total charitable giving was $298.42 billion. By comparison, the budget for the state of Missouri is only $26 billion. Giving in 2011 increased by 4% over the previous year. Giving had increased each year since 1987, but declined in 2008 and 2009. Nonetheless, charitable giving still represents only 2% of the gross domestic product. Giving data has been collected for 57 years by Giving USA, and the percentages have not changed much over the years. The single largest source of giving always has been from individuals, and it still is. Individual giving from people both living and dead through their wills, known as bequests, still represents 81% of all giving. Only 5% comes from corporations, and 14% comes from foundations. Giving from individuals increased by 3.9% in 2011, and bequests increased by 12.2%. This is good news for parents as teachers programs. Why? Well, who do you work with? Individuals, of course. So how does America give? Since individuals are the largest source of donations, how much do they give? The average household donates $2,564 a year, or more than $200 per month. Just think about your own giving. And who is giving the money? You may be surprised that the highest percentage of donors are people aged 20 and younger, with 27% of this demographic making donations. They are closely followed by people ages 45 to 64, with 26% as donors. This means that the people you work with, the families you serve, your neighbors and friends, most likely are making donations already. But have you asked them to consider giving to your work? To find out what people are doing in your community, you can use this interactive map with information at the state, metro, county, town, and zip code levels. It's from the August 20th, 2012 issue of the Chronicle of Philanthropy, and it is available online at the URL listed on the Helpful Websites slide. So where does it go? Like the giving statistics, these percentages have changed very little over the decades. 1/3 goes to religion, 13% to education, 10% to foundations, and 12% each to health and human services. I should explain that foundations was not one of the categories a few decades ago. However, more and more people are establishing their own foundations in order to manage their giving. And giving to donor-directed funds at community foundations has grown substantially over the past 10 years. Religious organizations are always the largest recipients. Just think about where you give the most each year. Second on most people's list of giving are educational organizations, such as your alumni group, and then human services and health organizations. This bodes very well for your program because Parents as Teachers has proven outcomes in both the health and education areas, our screenings and school readiness. This means that there are more potential funders for you in both of these areas. Also note that giving to both education and health groups rose in 2011. When you compare billions to trillions, you realize that there are fierce battles for the charitable dollars. In fact, the private sector funding is less than 1% of all federal spending. The takeaway message is that it is unlikely that private funds can ever replace public funding. So you need a mix of both public and private funds as a risk management issue. The ideal mix of funding is that no single giving source should account for more than 20% of your overall funding. For example, no single grant should be more than 20% of your funding. Why? What happens if that grant funding ends? The strongest position is to have strong earned income, fees, sales, etc., that are augmented by contributed income from contributions, grants, events. To determine your mix of funding, see the worksheet on pages 58 and 59 of the Guide to Funding. Determining your mix of funding also reinforces the need to be actively advocating for your share of the public funds at the local, state, and federal levels. Again, diversify, diversify, diversify. This slide is labeled Opportunities because so many PAT programs are not accessing various funding sources. On the annual program report, programs are asked to indicate their major funding sources, any source that represents 50% or more of their funding. For example, in the APR, under the local public funding option, programs may select local school district, county, city, or other funding that is used for their PAT program. While 30% of programs report that they receive federal funding, 70% say they do not. Only 5% of programs report state funding as a primary funding source. Just 18% of programs receive local funds, and 87% say they do not receive any private funding. So there are great opportunities to grow funding from other sources. For the 13% of programs that report that they receive private funding, only a handful are really doing fundraising. Let's face it, you cannot cash in-kind donations. But even this is less than a third of all programs receiving in-kind donations. This means that there are many opportunities to find additional funds. Unfortunately, these percentages do not match the earlier pie chart, illustrating the source of charitable dollars. If you recall, the single largest source of funds was individuals at 81%, corporations at 5%, and foundations at 14%. Use the giving statistics to focus your efforts when researching potential funding sources. Another key resource for researching potential funders is other similar organizations in your community. Read the newsletters and annual reports of other early childhood organizations to see who is funding them. This will demonstrate a donor's interest in families and young children. Kansas Parents as Teachers Association. This is a very creative association membership group that represents dozens of programs from across the state. They are a standalone 501c3. KPATA does a great job of both public and private fundraising. Nancy Keel is the program supervisor for the Olathe, Kansas School District's PAT program and also the executive director for KPATA. Nancy will also be available later to answer your questions. Please use the chat function if you have questions for Nancy. Now, let's listen. Colorado Parent and Child Foundation serves as the Colorado PAT state office. The foundation is also a 501c3 and raises both public and private funds. Many of their webinars are about program implementation topics, but there are also webinars about raising program support. The webinars are referred to as the WOW series, webinars on Wednesday. I'm sure that there are many other resources both at the PAT state offices and through local programs. We would love to know about your fundraising resources that might be helpful to other PAT programs. Please send me an email with links to your materials, and we will make them available to other programs if you agree. So how do we get started? PYW, WYP, plan your work and work your plan. Diversified funding is vitally important to sustainability. There are many formats for developing a fundraising plan. One sample format is included in the Guide to Funding on page 57. What they all have in common is diversified and multiple giving sources. This is just good planning. The last thing you want is to have all your eggs in one basket. Also, some of the helpful websites listed on a later slide have additional samples of development plans. Someone really must be responsible for fundraising. Otherwise, it's just too easy to let it slip by. Research is vital to getting funding. Don't waste your valuable time on funding sources that either aren't interested in early childhood programs or those where your organization isn't eligible to receive funding. Sign up for grant announcements. It's free, it's timely, and many times you can receive information specifically for early childhood. See the helpful websites for some ideas. And record keeping is required for reporting to funders. You must be able to account for how the money is spent. Many funders have specific reporting forms. Also, some states require that organizations be registered to do fundraising. Check with your Secretary of State's office about any such requirements. Because PAT has researched outcomes for families that include school readiness, abuse and neglect prevention, improved parenting practices, and healthy development screening, you can approach funders who fund a variety of community systems. For example, if you are sponsored by a health department, you might want to also look for funding for abuse prevention funds. One of the program outcomes for parents is teachers. The place to look for these funds is your state children's trust fund. The Guide to Funding includes information about both public and private funding. One of the resources found in the guide is targeted talking points for each of the systems listed here. The targeted talking points are found on pages 60 to 62 of the guide. There's also independent research around many of the talking points. You can find summaries of evaluations and the logic model for parents as teachers by clicking on the website on the Results tab. Let's quickly review some of the targeted talking points. Within the education system, one of the talking points is the alignment that ensures that children enter kindergarten prepared to learn. Another talking point is that Parents as Teachers closes the gap between children from high poverty families and children from more affluent families. Another alignment is the way that Parents as Teachers engages parents in their child's education, and that participation in Parents as Teachers leads to increased parental involvement once the child enters school. Within the social services systems, a talking point is the prevention of child abuse and neglect by helping parents to understand child development and set reasonable expectations. Within the mental health system, one of the talking points is that Parents as Teachers is a primary prevention strategy that reaches families before crisis hits and stops the cycle of diminished outcomes for children in families with mental illness. Within the health system, Parents as Teachers coordinates with the state early intervention systems to ensure children receive needed services and refers families to the state children's health insurance programs, or the CHIP programs. Also, Parents as Teachers educates parents about important health issues such as prenatal care, nutrition, safety, and immunization. And within the early care and education system, PAT helps identify family needs and, where appropriate, refers families for more intensive and specialized services, And PAT helps early care and education staff build partnerships with parents by providing staff with tools and information to share with parents. So where do you look for resources? Within the Guide to Funding, there are grant writing basics, ideas of where to look for support in your local program and community, a sample of a fund development planning chart, a funding worksheet to identify your income sources, the targeted talking points for different community systems, and helpful websites and publications. I particularly encourage you to look at page 56 for some ideas of where to look for funding in your community. The store managers of many local stores of national chains have the authority to make gifts ranging from a few $100s to thousands of dollars. The application process is usually simple, and the response time is within weeks. The same is true for community service clubs. By combining gifts from various resources, you can easily raise $5,000 to $25,000. The other benefit is that you raise visibility for your program and create new supporters. Most of the time, you will be able to ask these sources for support year after year, and you may even find yourself a champion. There are literally thousands of YouTube videos about fundraising and grant writing. Some of them are excellent. I highly recommend that you contact your local chapter of the Association of Fundraising Professionals, or AFP. You can find information about your local chapter at afpnet.org. It's on the list here. Most chapters offer workshops about how to do different kinds of fundraising and the fundraising trends in your community. Many also offer Meet the Donor events, so you can learn firsthand from local donors about their guidelines and areas of interest. There are foundations across your state and in your community. To research foundations in your community, visit the Foundation Center online. There is a wealth of information on the website that is free. You do not need a membership to find 990s to research prospects. I particularly want to direct you to community foundations. You will find these in most metropolitan areas, and some are statewide. Within community foundations are donor-directed funds. Ask your community foundation staff if they have any donor-directed funds that are interested in early childhood. And the best free resource is to sign up for emails. Some of these are also listed here. You get free emails alerting you to grant opportunities and deadlines. So here are your takeaways. There is a lot of money out there, but you have to go out and get it. Arm yourself with information, 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 and be creative. Think about the other funders and community systems. Foundations, corporations, and agencies are going to give it away because they must. You might as well get yours, and we are here to help. Simply ask. We have some questions that we will answer as time allows. Also, Nancy Keel is on the phone, and we will ask her to address your questions about KPATA. Okay, here's a question a number of you have asked. How do I apply for a 501c3 status? The easiest thing for you to do is to go to the IRS website. They will have information there for nonprofits, and you can find the process for applying for a 501c3 there. If you need help, I would encourage you to either ask your community college if there's someone there that can help you, or go to legal aid and see if you can get some help from one of their attorneys. Here's another question. If our PTO has a 501c3, can we use it for our PAT program? Probably not. I would encourage you instead to check and see if your school district has a 501c3. Again, developing an association like KPATA is a very good way to team up with neighboring PAT programs to do fundraising. What if I've never written a grant proposal before? Again, there's some tips on grant writing in the Guide to Funding. This is another case where local AFP chapters or community colleges often do workshops on grant writing, and I would encourage you to look for those resources. How do I approach my local target? This is very simple. You simply ask to talk to the manager. Again, these stores, local stores, are very helpful. They very much want to be involved in the community. And remember, the families you serve are probably their customers. I just want to remind you that your participation on this webinar earns you 1 hour of professional development credit. You will need to enter this yourself in your personal record. We will not be sending you verification of your attendance. The recorded webinar will be on the portal landing page in this month's updates. It will be available for 30 days for those who were not able to attend today. Professional development credit is only available to those who attended today's live webinar. You can also download a copy of this PowerPoint from the portal landing page starting next week. This is the first in a series of webinars about fundraising and marketing. Please be watching for future announcements. Thank you very much.